All right, we are going. You ready to go?
Yeah, man. Super ready.
All right, let me do a quick intro and then we'll just get into it, all right?
You got it.
Hey guys, welcome back to Otoconia. My name is Connor. This is going to be a confusing episode because I'm also joined by my friend Conor.
We just say single N or double N.
There we go. That's spelled differently. So today's a bonus episode. Hurrah is not here. We got Conor in her place. This is a bonus episode, and I'm really excited. I don't have this album on vinyl, but Conor and I have very different tastes in music, and I think it's kind of cool to explore, really dive deep into some of these albums. And so I had Conor pick an album, any album he wanted, and this is the one he picked. Do you want to do a quick intro, Conor, what we got going on today?
Oh yeah, man, absolutely. So yeah, I think you're right. I think our musical tastes are a little bit different, but I know you like kind of getting introspective and kind of like reviewing the content of stuff. I think you're pretty good at that. And so I picked an album that I think carries a lot of weight in that sort of department. So we're gonna be doing "Swimming" by Mac Miller. This is the last studio album that was released before Mac Miller's death. So there was a lot of stuff kind of going on in the background of Mac Miller's life as he was recording this album. And I think there's a lot to kind of cover.
Yeah, and I thought it was cool, man. I was on my commute to work today. I was listening to some Alice in Chains. I don't know if you're familiar, but they're a 90s grunge band. And a lot of their lyrics revolved around addiction, depression. And, I got home, checked out this album, really got into it. And it was really cool to see some of the similarities, even though, the genres are completely different. And, what that tells me that this is like a theme that's distinctly human, that transverses all forms of art and media. So I'm very excited to get into this. I'm very happy you picked this album. I actually really dig it, dude. I had a couple songs I really was vibing to, so I'm excited.
Good. Yeah, I know. Like when we're living together in college, and I used to play some rap songs. Like you kind of got into a couple of those, and I was like, I think out of all the albums that I definitely could have picked, this is probably the one that we could talk about for like hours on end. So see where that
Sweet.
goes.
Let's get right into it. First, before we start, I'm just do a quick announcement for the channel. We have two platforms now because of the YouTube police, the YouTube copyrights. Conor, I can't be an outlaw anymore, man. They got me on the last stream. They blocked it because of music. So what we're gonna do is YouTube is just gonna have the video and the commentary. If you want the commentary with the music, I'm gonna edit this and put it on Spotify later. So pick what you want, people. That's the deal. YouTube's keeping us down, so we gotta adapt. And then
Gotta
quick,
resist.
just gotta resist, man. Quick intro into who Conor is. I gotta gas you up before we get into the episode.
Oh, hit me.
Conor, great friend, a lifelong friend. I've known him since college. As you said, we lived together for a bit. I'm very proud of all of Conor's achievements, everything he's done academically and career-wise. Conor's an inspirational guy. Super good taste in music. So I'm excited that he has allowed us to have some of this time today to talk and really get into this album. So thank you, Conor.
Thank you, man. That was very sweet. That was really very cool. Yeah, I'm super stoked to be here. I think this is like a good format for a subject that I think we're both kind of like equally passionate about. I would say you probably have more background and stuff like this, but I'm excited to be kind of on here. How many episodes have you done so far?
So we were supposed to have 3 done, but the second episode, YouTube dropped the audio.
That's the
So
corrupted
that's
one.
why I have been really particular about making sure we got like a backup recording and everything. Dude, it was like an hour long. It was like 60 minutes. I was like, man, that was an episode. I had some good jokes in there, like, some good giggles, some good sillies. And someone was like, yo, did you listen to this yet? And I was like, what? And I checked the audio and it's just me talking, dude. The other person wasn't recorded at all. So
Hate to see it happen, but I'm happy to be here for like one of the first episodes of this podcast. I think it's gonna be good.
yeah, man, first bonus episode, first Zoom episode. So
First bonus episode.
all right, man, let's get right to it. So first, I do have some questions for you, but I just want you to give us kind of the overview of this album. Any background you want, anything you think the people should know, and then I'll kind of get into my interview questions.
Yeah, sure. So for anybody who's listening who's not like a deep fan of Mac Miller, Mac Miller is a rapper from our alma mater town of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So he has
No way, he's from Pittsburgh?
Yeah, dude, he's from Pittsburgh.
What? Oh, that's
Yeah.
awesome, man.
I mean, you wouldn't know, like, I'm a Pennsylvania kid, so that was always like a big deal. Like, oh,
Yeah,
like Pittsburgh rap. It was like him and Wiz Khalifa when I was growing up.
yeah,
So,
that's
yeah,
so
but
cool.
he's a Pittsburgh rapper. You can kind of see it in some of his albums. In fact, his like first studio album is is Blue Slide Park. Well, after he died, the actual Blue Slide Park in Pittsburgh was kind of like renamed in his honor. So I think that's pretty cool. But
That's awesome.
yeah, so he's got 6 studio albums, one of them released posthumously. His musical style is one that kind of like changed throughout the course of his career. So his early songs were much more like frat rap. I think like the critical acclaim for the first couple were pretty low, and then as he kind of grew on his feet and gained more published life experiences, everything seemed to get a lot deeper and more introspective. He was somebody who kind of focused on like the ideas of life and death, and what it means to reach nirvana and also kind of like live at the bottom of society. So those are themes that you kind of see throughout his discography. There are some key things in his personal life that I think set a very good background for this album particularly. So he was in a relationship with Ariana Grande from, I think it was 2016, which is around the time that The Divine Feminine was released, up until like May of 2018. And then he died in September of 2018. It was the day before my MCAT. We're in Pittsburgh. I'll always remember that because I was already stressed enough about the MCAT. It's not good news, but
taking a bummer dude right before the exam.
Massive bummer before the exam. I mean, I had obviously bigger things to worry about, but dude, it was not a good way to get into it. But yeah, so he died from an overdose. He had struggled with addiction and depression kind of throughout his career and life, and you see those themes kind of reflected in a lot of his music. So it's definitely not specific to this album, but it I feel like it's highlighted a lot differently in this one specifically. This was released after his breakup, and I think it was like well published that he was kind of in a low place when he wrote and released most of the songs on this album. There was the other thing that I wanted to mention is that there will be a lot of references to kind of events that took place, I guess, like kind of in the Perry period of his breakup. So he was arrested for DUI in May of 2018. I was trying to like retrace the steps on this. I couldn't tell if this occurred before or after the breakup, but you'll definitely see themes of that sort of struggle, kind of what led to that point and where he tries to go from there. So I think it sets the stage very appropriately for kind of like where these songs will take us.
That's awesome, man. You did your research, dude.
I love this album. Like I'm not like a super introspective guy when it kind of comes to music. I do like kind of like analyzing things, but I think this one in particular tells a story unlike any album I've listened to.
Sweet. All right, I have some research of my own just to add on, but I think you nailed it on the head. 5th studio album in the last in his lifetime, came out in 2018, as you said. This was recorded in Hollywood, so in LA. So I was like, it's interesting that he's from Pittsburgh because there was a question I wanted to ask you about East Coast versus West Coast, but we'll save that for a second. There's some really cool people on this album. J. Cole, who you also introduced me to, Snoop Dogg is in the credits, and Thundercat. So some cool people involved. It debuted number 3 on the U.S. Billboard's 200, and it was nominated for Best Rap Album at the 2019 Grammy Awards. So pretty cool.
Very cool.
All right, I got some interview questions. Right. You ready?
Yeah.
When did you first hear this album?
I first heard this album when it debuted in 2018, August.
Okay, what were you doing when you first heard it?
I was just studying for the MCAT, so I was in Pittsburgh. It was in like a month where my summer research had kind of like ended, and I was just kind of like buckling down, getting ready to go. Like obviously he had released like a couple of singles that hadn't made the album in like June and July, and they were awesome. So I was like super stoked, and when it dropped, I like listened to it through the first time. I was like, oh, like this is a really good album. Obviously a lot of themes with like heartbreak and depression. But honestly, it wasn't until like he died and really had the chance to like kind of deep dive into it where I kind of like understood the meaning around a lot of his songs. And so it was an album for me that like posthumously for him, kind of like carried a lot more meaning.
Yeah, I was reading a lot of comments online and people were saying that, they kind of listened to it once, really enjoyed it. And then when he passed away, they kind of looked into the lyrics and saw, a lot of the foreshadowing and some of the hints. So it's kind of interesting that a lot of people have that same experience with this album.
it is, I think, something very, all of my friends are Mac Miller fans, and it's something that we like kind of share with this album is we kind of like missed the signs of like of what was going to happen. I mean, he was always somebody that referenced like the thin line between life and death, and kind of what happens after and what everything is meant for. But yeah, for sure. I listened to it the first time. I was like, oh, this is like funky, good mix. Like I was like, oh, solid album, like 9 out of 10. And then, the more I've listened to it, and it's an album that I still play, pretty consistently in my life. I think the more meaning I've kind of taken from it.
That's awesome. It's fun that you said that you remember it studying for your MCAT. There's a lot of albums for me that kind of just set like a time in my life. You know what I mean? Like the summer in between semesters of college, or the new Tool album came out right before I started med school. So it's kind of fun when an album has that little temporal relationship in your life, because when you listen to it, you think back to that time, which I find is always kind of fun and interesting.
It's super interesting. I mean, yeah, it definitely brings me back to I was living in 327 at that time, so it definitely brings me back to like my college apartment, like my last like
Yeah.
getting ready for my last year of college, like kind of like kind of setting up, and this album kind of dropped. So yeah, I definitely remember that. You're right.
Nice. What's your favorite song off the album, man?
And I was kind of like afraid that you were gonna ask that question. All right.
Just sprung it on you. The trap.
Yeah, I think in the beginning or like in the early stages, my favorite song would probably have to be Small Worlds.
Okay.
I think like it was just like my style of rap at the time. Um, I think as time has gone on, it has some SoCos, but I mean, there's not like a song on this album in particular that I would say like it's not like an absolute
Yeah.
smash.
So Small Worlds was in the competition for my first favorite song, but can you guess what I think my favorite song is on the album? And I think you have a big influence on this.
All right, so can I get a hint? Like, is it more like rock based in terms of?
No, it's more of like maybe a slower song. Maybe that might give it away, but
Is it also So It Goes?
which one?
So It Goes. I guess it's not
No,
it.
I really like the first song, Come Back to Earth. For some reason, it kind of had like a really
Oh yeah.
It had a real like R&B kind of sound to it, and you played a lot of R&B when we were in college, and I actually like really kind of gravitated towards that genre. And the first song, I just think, I don't know, it just hit me, and we'll talk about it more when we break down the individual songs, but that was my favorite.
It's a good one.
All right, let's see a couple more questions. When did you first discover this genre of like hip hop / rap, and what made you gravitate towards it? When you first heard it, what was like the moment?
So I kind of grew up listening to like rap and hip hop, but I always had like a kind of broad sort of like taste in music. Like I always say, like the only things I really don't listen to are country and oldies and stuff like that. But yeah, so hip hop was always like kind of something that I was interested in when I was growing up. I kind of liked the fact that it was a little bit different than like the culture I was accustomed to. So it kind of like gave me a different like glance into other things, like things that I was not exposed to. I liked how versatile it was. Generally in like pop music, everything kind of sounds the same to me after a little while, but with hip hop, I feel like artists were a lot more flexible to kind of do what they want with their musical style. And because of that, every song kind of has like a different kind of touch to it. Especially like, things that aren't mainstream necessarily. I think like anti-pop rap and underground are very cool genres, because I think they just like kind of have their own unique feel to it. And a lot of it is kind of rappers trying to make a name for themselves. And so I think they're not afraid to be super creative, which I've always found to be pretty cool.
Nice, man. And then last question before we kind of get into some of the analysis of maybe the album artwork. How does Mac Miller fit into the history of hip hop, rap? Give me some context on, what made him unique, what made him kind of pop, and what made him stand out? And, does he fit into the history? It's kind of my general question.
I mean, as far as like recent history, I would say he absolutely kind of like fits into like sort of like I would say top tier. I think he had a lot of draw for things about him that were kind of like automatically unique. So he's from Pittsburgh. Aside from like Wiz and our generation, I really can't think of any like mainstream rappers that came out of Pittsburgh. And he wasn't afraid to kind of like flaunt that in his music and his personality. So I think that kind of drew a lot of people to him, kind of like right off the bat. He's white, and in rap, you don't really get a lot of like top tier white rappers. So I think he brought elements kind of like to the rap game that really kind of like set him apart from the pack, and he wasn't afraid to kind of like get creative with who he worked with and kind of like the styles of music that he produced. I think Mac Miller specifically is really great at telling stories, especially in like the later part of his career, and like really kind of like delving deep into like uncomfortable topics. I think that's something that really kind of set him apart. He was very introspective in his work, and I think he's probably one of the harder thinking rappers that there is.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, to me, it's kind of the mastery of your art form when you can make the music, but also it has some form of meaning behind it, because then you're taking it to a whole new level of storytelling, meaning, analysis, and it basically makes the show possible. So I definitely agree with you. I think for me, this was a really cool album to explore. And right before I got on the air with you, I listened to the Tiny Desk concert, and it's just it kind of strikes you. I was going to ask you about your interpretation of the album artwork, and after watching that Tiny Desk concert, and he's laughing, he's joking around, he's having a good time, and then you look at the album artwork and you think about the themes of the album, and it's just kind of, I don't know, man, to me it kind of makes you think about depression in general, and the signs and the symptoms, and it's not always visible. And it really is a striking juxtaposition, just watching that and then looking at the album artwork.
You make an excellent point, because he does touch on a lot of those themes as far as like the outward looking inward sort of thing. So I think like those feelings kind of like motivate you to like put a face on it. And so I think tons of people walk around not really expressing their emotions or their heart on their sleeve, whereas deep down there's a lot more kind of turning over and going on. And so that's definitely a theme that comes up pretty consistently in this album. So we'll definitely get to talking about that.
Yeah, and let me know if I'm on the right track. So when I'm looking at the album artwork, he's sitting in this box, and to me, it kind of looks like a coffin almost. And you kind of have some interesting symbolism. He's laying there with his eyes closed. His feet are bare, which is kind of a symbolism for death. His feet are dirty, maybe indicating that he walked a hard life or went through some difficulties. But then you also have the pink suit and the window, which is almost kind of, to me, some signs of optimism. It's not just a box that he's trapped in. There is a window to the outside world, and I thought maybe that also kind of alluded to the isolation of depression. And so I don't know. I'm not sure if that's what you picked up on the album cover. I'm interested to hear what you were thinking about it, but
took away all my notes, dude. That's like, so yeah, I think you did hit like the main point. So for a little bit of background, I think it's important. There's a song on the album called Self Care, which I believe that is in the list that we're going to talk about here. And that is actually like, that's shot in a coffin. So it's actually like him in a coffin, kind of waking up and then kind of trying to get out. We'll talk about specifics in the artwork once we get to that song. But if you notice in the window, I think it's looking out onto a blue sky with the horizon, like above the clouds. So it's kind of, for me, kind of represents the juxtaposition between like kind of flying high and living lifestyle, kind of like bouncing around places, always being on a jet, and how that like might really feel, which is like the feeling of being weighted down or like dead inside. And so yeah, there's a lot of juxtaposition that goes on in the album, and I think it starts with the album cover. I think it's pretty deliberate.
Yeah, that's a sweet point that I kind of overlooked. I didn't think of him flying high because a coffin's under the ground, airplanes in the air. So yeah, it's really cool. It because a lot of these songs, and we'll get into it in a second, talk about the fame that came with his rap career and how he's got all this money and wealth and fame, but but he still has this depression or this mental health issue. So I mean, that's a great point. That really kind of made the window clear to me, because I was trying to figure that out before we started. I was like, well, what's up with the window? But
yeah, we're gonna get around to it, because like there are definitely juxtapositions that are like very specific to that window and the coffin. But we're gonna have something to talk about later, so I guess
let's do it, man. Let's jump into the first song, Come Back to Earth. I have the lyrics up, so if we need to reference anything, but why don't you start us off and I'll just jump in whenever.
Just set us up as far as just like describing the song.
Yeah, whatever you want to do, man.
Yeah, so Come Back to Earth is the first song off of the album Swimming. Um, I think to start, this is kind of different melody than the beginning of the album. I don't know, man. I feel the need to kind of like set like a main background on the album and like some
Mhm.
theories that I have behind it before we get going. So
Yeah, go for it. Go
um,
for it.
yeah, so for me, Mac is kind of like a cyclical artist. So he'll kind of like begin albums where he left off on the last one
Mhm.
and like return at the end of the album to what will be coming. So to start this one, it's kind of like lighter melody, but it's slower. He kind of makes reference to a need for like more self awareness and kind of having more clarity. And he's looking for a way into the world. So I think that's probably a good place to start.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you pick up immediately on some of these themes. I mean, the opening lyric is just great. My regrets look like texts I shouldn't send. And that's just such a funny line because it's something that everyone's experienced, I think, at some point in their life with, the advent of cell phones and such. I've got neighbors, they're more like strangers. And immediately you get this weird kind of unsettling feeling, the feeling that when you send a text that you regret, it can't be undone, right? And so you do have this kind of weird feeling in your stomach, and then right away you got the ideas of isolation right in that first chorus.
Yeah, yeah. I'll save some stuff for the post song review, but yeah, I think we'll definitely be talking about that after.
Nice. Also, a fun fact: this was the first song he wrote after getting back from tour from the Divine Feminine album. So pretty interested. And also, he was asked in an interview if the song was about a breakup, and he replied with frustration because he said you can view this as a breakup album, and I think that definitely plays into the mentality and some of the themes. There's a lot of songs about healing and, like we said, mental health. So he said it definitely fits in, but it's more than that. And to me, I think it's more than that because this album is like I said at the beginning, universal and relatable. The themes that we talk about, I think everyone can relate in some way to what he's saying.
100%.
Did anything else stand out to you in the lyrics that any favorite lyrics or anything that really spoke to you?
Yeah, so I guess we'll just jump into it now, kind of since we're on this topic, and I think it's very interesting. Around the time, I guess like directly associated with the breakup, Ariana Grande had tweeted out that the reason that she couldn't, I forget like the actual quote, but the reason that she couldn't be with Mac is his inability to kind of like get his life together,
Mm.
kind of like move on and kind of be a man about things. And so I think one of the first lyrics that kind of stuck out to me um, is in my own way, this feels like living. So, Mac always kind of juxtaposed death with life and what it means to like find nirvana or not do it. And so Mac kind of like makes this reference to his dependence on his lifestyle, whatever it might be, drugs, fame, otherwise. Um, and then, he kind of like tries to rationalize that to him, what he's doing makes him feel alive. And obviously, if you're depressed or you're dependent on something, it's kind of like that vice is kind of what makes you feel like you are you. Um, and so as far as self-awareness goes, it kind of like shows that he is aware of what he's doing, but it is just part of him and it's part of his persona in music now. Um, but he does repeat several times that he just needs a way out of his own head. So to me,
Right.
that always kind of symbolized that he's kind of like searching for his out. He's trying to figure himself out, he's actively working to get things together, but he just can't seem to find a way around who he is. And if who he is destructive, he kind of like rationalizes what that means in the greater context.
And it kind of reminds me of the front cover too. He's got a window in the coffin. He's trying to look out, trying to get out of his own head. And some of the symbolism too in the bridge of the song. It says, "You don't know that sunshine don't feel right when you're inside all day. They told me it only gets better. Gray skies are drifting, not living forever." It really is really cool symbolism for how he feels. It kind of shows what you were saying about, whether it be drugs or rock and roll or, the lifestyle. He's,
Yeah.
spending too much time inside, and, he's he's looking at gray skies, it's so interesting because he's aware of what's going wrong. You know, there is a uncanny awareness of his mental status, yet things seem to progress like, you know, on a trains on a track. It just seems inevitable in some sense. So I thought that was also kind of interesting, grappling with being aware, but also in some way not being able to control what's happening.
Yeah. So it does bring up a lot of like kind of interesting feelings. One thing I thought was interesting with this song is the kind of like upbeat, light, and slow melody compared to the lyrics. It seems to be like kind of very dark. Um, Towards the end of the song, it kind of seems like with the violins kind of like going, you know, I'm not a music guy, so I don't really know how to like read it, but it
Yeah,
sounds like
okay.
I guess major to minor, like kind of like more into the bass. He's like
Yeah.
kind of becoming more aware of himself, and as he kind of repeats, he needs a way out. You know, it seems to highlight that what he has become is what seems to be causing his isolation. So he recognizes he has regrets and things that he can't take back, and that his isolation seems to be affecting his ability to like form loving relationships, meet his neighbors, you know, be a functioning person. And so, you know, he might be light on the outside. He might be living in a cloud under whatever influence it might be, fame or drugs. But at the same time, he's looking for his out.
For sure. Yeah, I think you hit it perfectly on the head, man. Yeah,
Very
and I
cool.
also really dig this song because it kind of has, I'm not sure if you could call it an R&B song, but you know, it has that muted guitar, it has the piano, it has the strings that come in at the end, and the way he sings it, you know, it just, to me, you can feel the weight of the song. And to me, that's like the best part of R&B is there's, you know, that blues component. So I think that's powerful. And when it's sung, I think it's even more powerful. So
Oh, 100%.
awesome, man. Any last remarks on the first song, Come Back to Earth?
Oh man, that was it. That was pretty much all I wanted to cover.
Sweet. Nice. You want to get into the next one?
Yeah, let's go.
I think we have Hurt Feelings next. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Nice. Okay. Let me pull up the lyrics. Alrighty, let's see. Do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, hurt feelings kind of to me is Matt coming like out of his own head, and kind of like into the trauma that he's created. Um, it's the first kind of moment of struggle that I think we see overtly in the album. So we kind of mentioned the tweet that you know, Ariana Grande kind of left him for you know, something better because he couldn't kind of get his life together. I mean, I really kind of wish I put the timeline together before I got on here as to whether or not the DUI crash happened before or after, but it was definitely around like the same time.
Right. It
And
was all
then
kind
he
of a
sort of,
blur.
yeah, it was all kind of a blur around that time. And he seems to make reference to that particular mistake a lot in this song. You know, he kind of points the finger to that, and in a way, he kind of like justifies it, but he kind of like recognizes that, you know, it's kind of like alienate him. So he has a line in there that says, I'm always saying I won't change, but I ain't the same. So I think for me, that kind of shows how, you know, in a lot of ways, things are different as he's kind of like grown up, as he's become more famous and rich, and it kind of like reflects how, you know, everything might be different now, um, but you know, at the same time, like he kind of is who he is.
Yeah, and I think that line is really important too, because to circle back on kind of a different theme, you were talking about how his musical, you know, sound and talent has changed over the albums, and that line is almost like a direct reference to that. You know, he's saying, "I won't change," but, and I think that's a powerful kind of lesson. You know, even if you want to be stubborn in the face of life, like life's going to change you, for better or for worse. And I think it's interesting that he follows that up with talking about fame and fortune because, you know, he has this cognitive dissonance of, I'm famous, I have fortune, people love my music, but I just still don't feel happy. And you can kind of see that in the lyrics. You know, he's talking about how strange this game really is. And I think that's a really, you know, kind of powerful point.
Yeah. So some specific lines that kind of like branch off of that are he paid the cost to see the apostrophes. So I think there's always like this idea like when you start something, you know, as risky as rap, like what you're going for is like the ultimate success. which he has absolutely achieved, right? I don't think anybody can say that Mac Miller was not a successful rapper in his lifetime, but he certainly paid the price in his relationships, his physical, and his mental health. I think he starts to acknowledge the fact that all those things kind of like took a backseat to, becoming a successful artist. Um, he goes on to say that he was always into some bullshit and not aligned. He was driving with his eyes closed, missing all the signs. To me, this kind of has like two meanings, right? So
Yeah.
he literally was driving with his eyes closed and ended up, wrapping his Mercedes around a telephone pole. Um, so I think he was like literally missing the signs as to like what might be causing his downfall, and he had to pay a physical price for it. But it also gets back into the sort of the mental health. Like, did he kind of ignore the problems in his life, and did it kind of degrade him as a person? And what did that cost him?
Yeah, and I think there's also a really weird part in this song. It starts with the verse, "Down go the system, long live the king." That
Mm-hmm.
entire verse is almost like a distinctly different song in the lyrical content. He's almost kind of taking some of the wisdom that he missed, whether it be, from fortune, from depression, from living life, and he puts it like some of that back into the lyrics, which I think is kind of interesting. He's talking about turn the power off, get your water from the spring, kind of unplugging in a sense because we live fast lives. He respect the Adone. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it's kind of a reference to his mother who is Jewish. He's talking about don't mess with your pride, which is like one of the deadly sins in Christianity. So I don't know, kind of interesting, man. He's almost taking his pain and his life experience and putting in some lessons for people to kind of read between the lines. And this song too, when you just listen to it, it's a pretty cool party song. It really has a good beat. It's really driving, and it's just kind of fun. I'd imagine it's fun to listen to driving around too.
Oh, dude, like I always think about like whipping this to Pittsburgh. Yeah, it's definitely a good drive around song, but you definitely brought the religious context into it. I hadn't even thought about
Yeah.
that. So basically, like when I hear the second verse, you're right. It is kind of like a different song. The first one is a realization of kind of like what has become of him. And then when I see, respect the outline, and don't be a victim of your pride, to me, that's kind of like a commitment, right? So he's kind of like tried to learn his lesson. And so now he's going to try to like stay in the bounds of society, I guess, and try to, make something or change what is. Um, so while the first verse might be sort of a realization, the second one's definitely a commitment to something greater.
Mm. And it's cool that you see this progression along the album. The songs that you picked in particular, I think you nailed it right on the head of, telling that progression. We almost kind of see his thought pattern going on through these songs, which is, I think, a really cool effect.
Mm-hmm. One thing I did want to kind of bring up, so the album is obviously called Swimming, right?
Right.
For me, it's kind of a progression from top to bottom, but in the first verse especially, I haven't like listened to the song specifically in a little while. It kind of sounds like bubbles
Mm.
within the melody. um, so it's like, could you be drowning possibly? Could he be kind of drowning under the weight of his own realizations, and could he be trying to come to the surface and kind of see and commit to actually swimming? So just an idea, just thought.
Man, dude, that's deep, dude. Did you get your like a philosophy minor or something when I wasn't looking?
Yeah, something like that. It's just in rap though.
Nice, man. Yeah, and I think that's cool because the next song you see the first I guess reference to swimming in the lyrics, which we'll see in a second. Any last comments on Hurt Feelings?
No, great song. That's all.
Yeah, J. Cole's in it too, right? On that song, he's
I
highlighted on
think
it.
he might have produced it. I don't think he's in this one.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Maybe I read that wrong, but yeah, pretty cool. Alrighty, Perfecto is the next one, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty, let's see. Start us off, man.
All right. So we've already kind of talked about the idea of Mac trying to like portray, or at least kind of contextualize the idea of being fine on the outside, but on the inside, kind of waiting. I feel like with Perfecto, this kind of like puts all of that forward, especially. So on the outside, he appears to be fine, but within himself, he's actually drowning. Um, specifically with the lyrics, "Holding my breath, this ain't what I expected." He kind of comes forward to say that everything around him is much greater than what he could have anticipated. And despite kind of like being weighted down, he feels the need to kind of hold his breath and kind of buy his own time. Specifically, so he says, living off borrowed time, often on the fence on the line. I think it's his realization that what he's doing could actually be the death of him, could actually drown him. And so he's always like respected time specifically in a lot of his music, but the feel of this song at time is now beginning to wane from him as he goes down personally. He makes reference to people calling him from the shore. So, there are people that are kind of trying to help him, but, he can't seem to get out of the weight of who he is, regardless of what might be causing that. Then towards like, I think it's the end of the first verse, he kind of like just acknowledges that he might be going down. To me, it always kind of like felt like he might be trying to like ask, what should he come and swim to the surface for? Like, is there a point in actually trying to get out of this rut? Or should he continue down the path he's on and remain, I don't want to say comfortable, but it begs the question of how hard change could really be. And if you are content in where you are, if you can find peace in whatever vice might serve you, of what point is there to like kind of come out of it?
Yeah, man, I think you really summed up this song great, man. There is kind of this sad and paradoxical duality between one's appearance and how one feels inside. And, this is kind of always the case with depression. There's this outward feeling, this need to portray oneself as fine. And I'm sure that also goes into the fame and fortune aspect of his life, his image, trying to act like, he's having fun and he's a rapper, he's famous, living that lavish lifestyle. And there's so many references to water, which you nailed. He's talking about on the surface, he's talking about is a surface and, surface of water, cool, calm, collected, you swallow it, drown. I mean, really kind of fits into this swimming theme. And the last outro is kind of interesting because it's very vague. He's talking about, a she pick me up, spin me around. And I think you can interpret it in a lot of different ways. You can interpret it as, like you said, a substance that helps him get through, like a physical person, like, a relationship. Or I also kind of just thought of it as like, the water, the water's kind of picking him up, spinning him around, like almost like an undertow. So I thought that was interesting. I thought that's really cool, that outro kind of portion, which really kind of leaves it up in the air. Is it an optimistic outro or is it kind of pessimistic? It's hard to tell because the words are so optimistic. He's talking about, love me, spin me around, perfect. But then when you read into it, it's kind of a insidious, sinister. So I'm not sure.
I got some stuff to say on that.
Yeah. Dude, you sipped the Guinness mug, man. You were ready to go.
Yeah. So, you made a very interesting point on the outro, especially. Just one more point I have written down. So, he makes a reference, or he has a line in this song that says, like, if I start moving, I'll float. As far as like what the outside of somebody will actually tell you, it basically kind of calls into question whether or not, if you just like kind of continue on, will you actually like just survive and be fine, and will everything just like appear as perfect as it can be? So it's like, if he just continues on with his ways, will he just kind of like get through life, or is there something more to it? And no, in this song specifically, I feel like he kind of like, he's reluctant to kind of like change his ways because he understands that he's now drowning. But in the same way, he's like, if I just like kind of continue with what has become comfortable, can I just manage it? But it's asked in like a very questionable way, or it's spoken in like a very questionable way, where he does understand that what he's doing might actually drown him, but is that just all it's worth? Now the outro specifically, have you listened to the Divine Feminine?
I have not, no, but I will definitely investigate that after this album because I really did dig this album.
Yeah, so I think I have a little bit more perspective because obviously, like, I've listened to the Divine Feminine,
right.
A number of times, but the Divine Feminine was very different from other works that Mac has had produced prior to it. This was like shortly after he officially began his relationship with Ariana Grande. He released this. It was much more deeper and introspective. And in a way, I feel like a lot of the songs on that album were like really him kind of like finding center and balance and really kind of like creating his life. And when you think about it, like, what does the divine do, right? It's supposed to, kind of create and judge life. And throughout that album specifically, he had kind of referenced that in this new comfortable place, theoretically, no proof, but with Ariana, it kind of made sense to him. And, he had a life that was better than what he had had. And then when that kind of left him, he began to drown. So we can just assume that like that's the first point of his newfound drowning. So with the outro, I kind of read it as, she was the creator of life for Mac, right? But Mac seems to think that she did not understand that power because whatever is divine can both create and destroy life. He references how she can, take them apart and put them back together, specifically in those lyrics. It calls back a lot to the idea of what is divine and, what kind of power like something like that can hold over a person.
Dude, that was spicy, man. I really like that.
As soon as you
part.
started talking about the outro, I was like, I gotta say something. Gotta say it. So
yeah,
I think in a lot of ways it's not as clear cut, depending on like how much you understand about the cyclical nature of Mac's music. But with the divine feminine in mind, I think the outro to me reads a little differently.
I was gonna like look up the meaning of that item or the album title because I thought that was kind of an interesting title, The Divine Feminine, and that is such a cool point with the divine can create or destroy. So, oh man, that was sweet.
Yeah, that was good, right? I thought so too. Yeah, dude.
Damn,
there are
man.
a lot of like very interesting. I have to say, like there are a lot of like very interesting kind of like dichotomies about this album. Like I used to read about it a lot more when I was like kind of interested in it. Not that I'm not now, but obviously I've listened to it so many times. I feel like there's a solidified meaning. But there are like those little things in there that that'll definitely get you.
And it's so rewarding as a fan too, because obviously that flew right over my head because I haven't dived into all the albums. So it must be cool to kind of see those nods to the fans, which is
dude. And it's like it's always something new. Like when you listen to it, or you like pick up on something different, or like a new theory like kind of pops up in your head. It's a cool thing about rap, dude. It's like it is kind of a story, and specifically with Mac, he's a good storyteller. So
awesome, man. Should we dive into the next one?
Let's do it.
All right, let's see. We got Self-Care, right?
This is Self-Care, yeah.
Okay, take us away, man.
All right, so I would say, and like I can't confirm this, maybe you can if you have like Spotify open, but Self-Care seemed to have been the most popular song on this album. At least in my circle, I would say it's the one that people kind of like call to.
It was indeed. It was triple platinum, and it was the highest of his certified songs across all albums. So
yeah. So very popular song. I feel like it resonates with a lot of people, and that's kind of like why it kind of took off. As far as the placement of this song in the album, this is kind of like the first hint that we have that he's going to take off, right? He's going to try to ascend, but he realizes that he can't do it without kind of addressing the problems that confine him. Speaking of confining him, well, as I mentioned earlier, this is the music video that takes place in the coffin.
I was just about to bring that up, man. You got me.
So it literally is him in the coffin, right? He's remaining calm, cool, and collected. So he's either drowning or being buried. And then so basically the backdrop of this is like him lighting up a cigarette and then him trying to like etch his way out. I haven't seen the music video, so I don't remember if like he tried to etch something like specifically in the coffin or what happened, but it's eventually like him trying to like break out of this wall that he kind of built for himself. Interestingly enough,
I got the words. He carves memento mori, which means remember that you have to die, that's pretty heavy. So
that's pretty heavy. And when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense because Mac is always very cyclical in a lot of ways. This kind of reflects like a new life, but in the face of an impending death. So when he carves that, it would make a lot of sense that the weight of what he's buried under collapses in on himself and he tries to ascend. But as we'll see, he's still weighted down by a lot of other stuff in this life that he's created. So that's is a very interesting point. I can't take credit for this. I did see it somewhere a long time ago, but Van Gogh had a painting of a skeleton with a cigarette in its mouth.
Mm.
I thought it was very interesting that like if you put the two side by side, there's some comparison between the two. Just thought. Um, so a couple of lines that I think are kind of important in connecting like kind of the cyclical nature of this album. He says, "I've been reading the signs and I've been losing my mind." So if you recall in his in Hurt Feelings, he referenced the fact that he was not reading the signs, right? So he's missing the signs, he's driving crazy, and like ultimately led to his demise. And now in Self-Care, when he's really becoming introspective and kind of seeing who he's become for what he is, it starts to drive him crazy. And so he feels like the need to like break free of whatever weight he's put himself under and kind of emerge out of himself. So he also says, "It must be nice above the lights and what a lovely life that I've made." A couple things off of this. I don't know if you knew, Mac Miller has a house on Mount Washington.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Yeah, so it's on the side that overlooks the city.
For those who don't know, Pittsburgh's in like this giant bowl, essentially, and there's this, I guess, giant hill slash small mountain called Mount Washington. You can take the trolley up there. It's really cool, the lift, and it is a really spectacular view of the city. Like when you're up there, you can just see everything. So it's an
amazing
cool
view. Yeah, so it's an amazing view. And then there are like two sides to like the street, and that difference in house prices is pretty crazy. But yeah, so Mac's house is like a $3 million house. It's right on the top of Mount Washington, which is that hill, and it overlooks the city. For anybody who hasn't been to Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh at night when it's illuminated, it's beautiful. Yeah, it's an awesome place. But for me, that line kind of represents it. Like he has built this life, right? He's famous, he's rich, he was like everything that it was meant to be when he kind of started. But he hasn't come to like realize like the happiness. So he has like a mansion like above the lights, but he hasn't actually been able to enjoy it because of like who he is inside. So he's starting to realize like kind of what he's missing when he's like weighted down. Yeah, so I thought that was weird. And then he has a line in there where he's like, "The Mercedes drove me crazy. I was speeding." So I think the reference to the fact that it's specifically a Mercedes is pretty important because obviously like Mercedes is a luxury car brand. It takes a lot to kind of like achieve a Mercedes, but in achieving what it took to buy a Mercedes, it also like kind of drove him crazy, right? And so in his like depleted mental state, he ended up wrapping the Mercedes around a tree. So yeah, there's a lot that I think he like just comes to like fully realize, and continuing from the last song. And now he's like trying to like ascend and come out of the dirt.
for sure. And I think there's a weird kind of placement into the first part of the song and the second part of the song, which is titled Oblivion. And I think there is this interesting, I mean, like you were just saying, the very first part of the song is almost kind of this lavagant lifestyle, and you wouldn't expect the second part to follow. And he's talking about oblivion. And I think it's interesting that you were talking about life, death, and nirvana, because, how you interpret the second part is so, I think, subjective. To me, I kind of see it as pessimistic. Like, as the album's progressing, he's drowning. And he's talking about oblivion. He's talking about how beautiful the feeling is of oblivion because it's so calm and he's just chilling. And I think it's like clearly a reference to how his mind is just almost panicked in this sense of depression, like this panic of drowning. But then he's experiencing this oblivion, that you experience at the end of drowning. So I thought it was kind of a really good part of the metaphor of the whole swimming, I think, metaphor, and interesting ending for the song in general.
100%. Yeah. So my take on the outro was more like, how he says like, "I didn't know what I was missing. I got stuck in oblivion." So, to him, oblivion just obviously kind of means like the scattered pits of life before death, obviously. So he got kind of like trapped within the context of like who he was, and like in the process of that, he didn't realize kind of like all that he had done and what his life was actually worth. So when he's actually like riding around his city, that's like his sense that like things now feel good, like whatever life may come, it'll be fine. But he does obviously re-reference every life ends in oblivion. So
Right.
He understands that, death is impending, and he ultimately, I feel, at the end of the song, wants to make something of that.
Yeah, man. I think that's a really good interpretation. And I think, I think you nailed it right on the head. Really good song, man. I mean, it's so good.
I'm glad you're like as into this album as I didn't really know how this would go over. I know it's not like really your genre, but
Yeah.
you're definitely a good reader. And so if you like stories, this is definitely an album. So this is cool.
And I think this is the point of, Otoconia and the podcast in general. We did one of Haraz's picks, the first episode, Happier Than Ever. And I like that album too. Don't get me wrong. Billie Eilish is cool. But I think as we do more episodes, we'll have more bonus episodes, like special guests like yourself. It's cool to kind of just ask people, pick an album and see why they picked it. And it'll be fun because, when I pick albums in the future, it'll be kind of foreign to people. It'll be a lot of like classic rock, progressive rock. So, in doing this podcast, I hope people find new genres and new music and kind of think about the meaning behind music. And it's also cool for me to, get to talk to my friends and figure out what their favorite albums are and pick their brains. So, I mean, that's really the whole point of doing this,
Yeah, 100%. It's awesome. Yeah, I like the format of it too. We just kind of go through and like talk about the meaning of each song. It's I don't know, it's definitely cool. But when you told me like you wanted me on the show, like the first thing that like came to mind was like, oh, we got to do swimming. Like this definitely like brings the most out. Yeah, and I have to think of like other albums if you want me back on the show.
Oh, I know, man. It'll be fun, dude. My dream for this in the future. I know we're doing this over Zoom because of distance wise, and I guess COVID too.
Oh, I gotta come out to Chicago.
I know, man. But the studio, man. Yeah. But for me, what I envision this podcast as, like, all of the friends just go to a place, listen to the album, and then talk about it. Like, to me, that would just be like, it's the best hang, like talking about something that someone's really passionate about, having a few drinks and just really kicking back and listening to music. Like, to me, that's the dream. So maybe we'll get there one day with an actual studio, not just my living room. But
yeah, set it up like the Joe Rogan experience.
Yeah, man, I gotta get a Jamie too. I gotta get a little sidekick.
I thought you had a Jamie. I thought somebody was helping you.
I did, dude. I did, but no, I gotta get one for like every episode.
Get Sarah back here.
Yeah. Sarah and Chase were on the first one, and I feel so bad because the episode that got deleted, the audio was with Chase, and he was like so excited to be in front of the camera. I was excited to like put it out there. We were doing like Glass Animals, so it was like a pretty deep album, and the themes kind of matched with the first episode. And then we finished. He's like, "Oh, that was great! Like, thanks for having me." And then I'm like, "Oh, it messed up."
So, it just be like that in the podcast game.
Anyway, all right, man. We got 4 more songs. You got the time, or do you want to break it up in a second episode? Your call.
No, 4 more songs.
Sorry, not episode. Keep going.
No, all right, let's keep going if you want.
Let's do it, man. So we got Ladders next.
Yeah. So Ladders. Well, I guess let's set more context here. There are 2 songs specifically, like at this point in the album, called Wings and Ladders, right? So I guess the placement of the songs to me kind of like begs the question of how is he going to like ascend out of wherever he's come from, right? So is he going to be like Wings? Is he going to try to like coast and kind of find himself and figure it out? I know we didn't review that song because I didn't know how much more importance it carried.
Right.
And to be honest, like I like Ladders better and for telling the story. So ultimately, I feel like he kind of like chooses Ladders. Wings is a much more like solemn song. Ladders is very kind of like upbeat. Kind of shows that like he's kind of like willing to put the work in on maintaining self-care, kind of coming out of it and actually like kind of working to achieve like sort of his greater purpose, right? Ascending and kind of figuring out like what it means to kind of be at the top. Wings kind of carries more of an idea that he's kind of committed to advices. So it's like, this is how I flew beforehand, right? I kind of coasted with the use of drugs and self-isolation, stuff like that. But with Ladders and symbolizing kind of like the work that it takes to get out of that rut, I think he kind of like finds himself and his spirit a little bit more. Obviously, it's like upbeat because he kind of understands the work that it kind of takes to ascend out of whatever prison he's kind of trapped himself in. Hopefully he'll find the top. But some lyrics that I took out of the song, but we don't have a lot of time to waste, so we have to find a way. I think that's a very deliberate kind of word choice,
For sure.
kind of encompassing the fact that he now understands that time is of the essence and oblivion is now impending. So he has to find a way. Um, it's not really like an option for him. So he also says that I had a plan to change. You can't stand in the rain, little delay, but I come and you're cool with it. So I think it's kind of like him saying like, okay, I was going to change like all along, whether or not that's true. It's kind of up to interpretation. But when he was trying to change, quote, Ariana Grande, who we can assume is his support system, kind of like left him. And he's like, okay, so with this delay, like I don't have a support system, so now I'm in the rain, but it's fine. So I guess in a way, like he's kind of like still in the water, right? But he doesn't have to try to like swim anymore. He just has to keep like ascending up above the clouds. That's kind of the running theme that I kind of like took with this part of the album. So as far as like where this album kind of goes and what story it tells, I feel like this is like the first part where we really see like his ascent, right? So we see like the drowning, the burial, the realization, and now we're on the turnaround or the rising action.
It's interesting that you use that word ascent, because I was actually just thinking about Jacob's ladder, which is a story from the Old Testament. It's a dream. One of the I forget what figure in the Old Testament had a dream of a ladder that ascended to heaven, and it was mainly a parable for the ascension of the Jewish people out of Egypt into the Holy Land. And I find it interesting that the name of this song is Ladders and not just Ladder, because I think he's taking that idea of ascent, which you mentioned, and applying it to everyone. Everyone kind of has this battle. And the metaphor, it's a great metaphor. The higher you climb, the more you see the beautiful view, but also the higher you fall if you do. So I thought it was a really cool kind of play on words. I'm not sure if that was the intention. He does have a mother who's Jewish, so I'm not sure if that played into it, but yeah, I think you nailed it around the head.
It's interesting that you mentioned that so much, because like him being a white Jewish rapper was kind of a big part of his persona. At least like when I was growing up, it's obviously super unique. There are not a lot of rappers kind of with that demographic. So I'm curious, like how much about faith did you kind of hear in this album?
Well, yeah, like I mentioned before. Oh, sorry, did you say fate or faith?
Faith.
Faith. Yeah, I kind of saw some allusions to fate. We were talking about being aware of his depression, but also feeling kind of like a train on a track. And I'm not sure, I kind of see some aspects of the faith. There is an optimism, excuse me, so some of these songs, and I think maybe that's where the faith might kind of come in. But yeah, I'm really not sure if that really was a reference to Jacob's ladder or not, but it's just something that I kind of thought about and thought might be kind of an interesting interpretation.
Very cool. Yeah, I didn't know that. I'm gonna have to write that down. That's good.
Nice, man. All right, any last comments on the ladders?
No, that's pretty much it. We're on the ascent.
It's got a cool jazz element to it too. Some cool instruments.
Very jazzy, very upbeat. Yeah, it's different from the other songs.
Which is cool because a lot of these songs are so unique in their themes. We've been discussing a lot of the lyrics, but a lot of the tonality of the music really reflects it too. So it's pretty artistic in that sense to be able to match some of the, I guess, literary concepts we're talking about with the actual sound and sonics of the album. So really masterfully produced, in my opinion.
It is very, very well produced. One thing that we didn't talk about, there's a song called "What's the Use." It's another like sort of like jazzy song on the album that takes place in the beginning in what I would consider like the descent, where he's kind of like trying to figure out like is it even like kind of worth changing, or is it better and happier just to be where he is. So yeah, it's like the use of jazz and like how kind of they place the jazzy songs in the album is definitely interesting, and definitely provokes a lot of questions from the listener.
Yeah, and I think the order of the names is interesting too. I mean, he has wings and ladders next to each other. If you have wings, the ladder is useless to you. So I think confirming that the ladder is the journey, like the struggle of the journey. And once you have your wings, you've already experienced the hardship of the journey, and you don't need to climb the ladder. So
kind of exactly. But in some cases, like one could assume like the wings might just be the vice. So though he might have wings, he might not be flying, right? So just because like you have wings doesn't mean like you can necessarily like fly. And so I think the placement of like ladders after wings is kind of important, because he kind of understands that like what he has now isn't helping him fly, right? And you can kind of hear that in like the lyrics of that song. And then he has then he kind of gets the realization that he needs to use the ladder at all costs. So,
Dude, that was the most philosophical description of a penguin or ostrich I've ever heard.
I started thinking about an ostrich. It was just like, oh
no. Hiding your head in the sand, dude. Let's see how far we can keep this metaphor going. Nice. All right, let's hit Smaller Worlds, man. This is a great song. I really liked the performance on Tiny Desk concerts. I think I really do gravitate towards I guess the live version of songs or the more intimate version of songs. To me, in that live version, his vocals really come through, and there's a lot of emotion and like just the tone and the way he's singing it mixed with the powerful bass. So really cool song. And when I think of this album, this song kind of stood out to me the most because it's the most unusual in the way he's singing it and rapping it. It really is distinctly different than the other songs.
I think you raise an interesting point. First off, Mac Miller's Tiny Desk concert, definitely one of the better Tiny Desk concerts, if not the best. I don't know. Yeah. I know it's just like my opinion, but I mean, the soul that like kind of comes out specifically in the song, but like in all of his other ones too, are it's pretty apparent like how much emotion like actually like went into the creation of this album. And I think he had made Tiny Desk concert like 2 weeks or something before his death. So in that framing, it's definitely, it has a massive impact. And for somebody who's like a fan of him like me, it's definitely very special. It's like the last live performance that we got at Max. So yeah, super interesting. But so Small Worlds, I would say, is definitely different from every song that we've at least heard before it. Probably after too. It's one of his more mellow rap songs, right? To me, the melody kind of feels like you're meant to be kind of floating and like looking down onto something else. Literally, like once you have kind of like reached the top, you begin to understand that like things are not as grand as you've seen, like as they might have seen from the bottom. So, it's a super interesting concept as far as like where it's placed in the album as well. So my interpretation of the song is definitely that he's kind of ascended from the ladder. Now he's what one might call like heaven or like some sort of like personal nirvana, where he actually gets to like kind of see like what the meaning of life might actually be. So one, I think, important lyric in this specifically is the no need for shame. I get more peace at slow speeds. Going back to like the car crash incident, I think he understands that like he doesn't need necessarily everything that has physically like kind of come with the success he's brought, and that like what truly matters is kind of like the peace that he finds like within himself. So maybe it's not necessarily the fast life, maybe it's just like the understanding of the world around him, and like actually like having that self-awareness is kind of like critical in kind of like bring everything full circle. I would like to hear your thoughts on the beginning of the song before we get into the outro, because I think you're gonna have
I was gonna start with the outro because you really I think you had a great point there. But I mean, there's a lot of different small ideas I think going on in this song. The first verse, it's kind of talking about you always desire something you don't have, which is interesting because he has fame. He basically has the life in a lot of people's eyes, but he doesn't have his peace of mind. And I think that's kind of an important theme that we've been talking about. The song itself, like we said, is introspective. It's an intimate song. Really cool effect with the muted guitar. Let's see. Yeah, and just the second verse too. I mean, a lot of don't want to grow old, so I just smoke just in case. Like I don't know, there's some like really woody lines and some like really dark lines, which makes the outro interesting. If you don't mind if I touch upon that. But you talked about
one thing just like real quick. So he does like, we talk a lot about like him trying to find like that self peace. I think he's like coming to the revelation that he can find peace in whatever environment that he's trying to be in. So he's like, nobody knows you like when you are who you are, or you're different from like what you've been, right? But it's kind of hard to complain when like you actually found that 5-star hotel, that peace of mind. So that's definitely interesting. But yeah, go ahead, dive in the outro.
Yeah, no, all good. You were talking about that peace of mind, finding heaven, and to me, each of these songs is kind of progressing in his stages of depression or his like awareness of depression. And there's this optimism at the end of the song, you know, and we've talked about this in other songs. um I'm tired, I don't got a spare second, win or lose, win or lose, I don't keep count, nobody checking. It's kind of interesting here because I think his version of peace or nirvana or heaven is different than what we kind of see, you know. In light of his, you know, overdose and suicide, we think, oh, he didn't find peace, like, you know, his demons got him, and you know, is one way to phrase it. But there's almost this acceptance of what's going to happen in this outro. You know, he's talking about how he doesn't have a second to spare because he knows inevitably that, you know, something might happen or is going down. And it's
Mm.
interesting that he finds peace in that because, you know, he is battling through this depression, but there is this acceptance of death. And I think we see that theme a lot throughout the album, portrayed by the cigarettes. You know, he's talking about smoking in the previous verse and beginning of the song, and also in the music video when he's smoking a cigarette in a coffin when there's no oxygen, you know. And it's almost this peace and acceptance of our mortality, which I think he's really getting at. Not the peace of like a long life in his, that's not his idea of a peaceful life, but to him it's being okay with the life that he's lived. And I think the first part of the song really gets at that too. You know, it's talking about what he's achieved, you know, and what he's been able to do. So that's kind of how I read it. I'm interested to hear if you kind of interpret it in a different way.
No, I think like that's kind of like the big idea, right? It's kind of like um, he'll always kind of like be connected with his past. And I think the question that like the end of this song kind of asks is to what extent and like how, you know, that would really affect him. Um, I think the melody change here is of critical importance, right? Because this is kind of like the climax, right? So he's kind of like reached the top. He's kind of like in some ways found what he's looking for. Um, what he kind of does to maintain that is up to like sort of subjective interpretation. But when the melody changes and he opens with 9 times out of 10 I get it wrong, that's why I wrote this song. Um, he told himself to hold on, but he can feel his fingers slipping, and in an instant he'll be gone. So he does recognize that it only takes like kind of like one misstep, and even though he's at the top, he's still kind of connected to who he was and the vices that held him down before, right? And I think he kind of acknowledges the fact that like it would really only take one slip up to kill him, which ultimately it might have. Um, so it's ultimately kind of a call to like who he was and how he can't like change the past or change who he was or take back those regrettable texts. It's you know, is he going to slip from the ladder? I don't know. He doesn't know. So it's like kind of a, I'm not sure, like sort of a question of the future, I guess I would say. But then he also gets very introspective in the second half of that outro, where it's like, do you want it all? It's all mediocre. Like, so, you know, having it all still doesn't change the fact that like, you know, he's always going to be kind of like battling with these feelings, and he might not always like kind of feel adequate. And he's still always going to kind of question what everything means. So I think in like the very last part where he's sitting at a wall looking at the posters, and he's trying to ask himself like who he wants to be. That's the most introspective part. So like now that he's at the top, it's like, okay, like where do you kind of go from here? Like, have you found peace, or is peace always something that you have to like persistently work for?
Right. And I think that line is so important too, because, you know, he's talking about, to me, I thought he was talking about his life almost. You know, he's struggling through this depression. He has all these bad days. And, you know, we see this portrayed in the lyrics of the album. And he's kind of asking the audience, if you were me and you lived this life, do you want a long life that's filled with a lot of pain and suffering that's, in quote, like mediocre? And then it kind of contrasts to the end of the album where, you know, he doesn't have a second to spare, but he's kind of okay with it. Win or lose, he's not counting. So I thought that kind of also fed into what I was saying before about being at peace with, he knows what's coming up. And, you know, you kind of discussed that with one slip up of drug use. He knows in his head that that's probably his future. And I think that fits perfectly into the next song, which is Jet Fuel, which is majorly, I think, about drug use, if you want to get into that.
Yeah. Are we doing conversations?
I didn't have that one on my list, but if you want to talk about it real quick, I'm down.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So conversations and jet fuel, I guess kind of go together. Basically like the idea of conversations that he's like having what I feel like is kind of a dialogue with not a dialogue, but like just like talking to like his former self, right? And he's trying to like understand like how what he's done in the past kind of got him to where he is. So I guess he can kind of avoid it. So um, the main idea of this song is that he kind of like tries to evaluate like who's around him and for what reason.
Mm.
And he's kind of doing whatever he can to avoid it, right? Ultimately, like, he can't just like talk about being successful or earning money or kind of staying clean. He actually has to like put steps in place to actually do that. The couple of like key lines in that song are, I don't recognize these faces. He's like asking who people are and who they came with. So he's starting to realize like there are certain parties who are like toxic in his existence, right? And to me, he's kind of like trying to evaluate who should be there and who shouldn't. He also like kind of contemplates like who was with him when he didn't have anything and who's there now. And it's like, okay, so who's like actually kind of like passionate about like seeing him through to like the end of Oblivion, right? He also makes reference that everybody around him is famous, wild, and dangerous. I don't consider Mac to be an incredibly like dangerous guy, right? But having people around him who are dangerous, I guess like what I always question was like, dangerous in like what way? Dangerous is in like bad influences. Are they going to be the thing that like pulls you down? Are they your connection to the past life that you now regret? Yeah, a lot of interesting questions there. It's one of my favorite songs on the album. It's definitely like a pump up song. It's like a very like self realization and motivation song.
That's awesome, man. And yeah, that's a theme I think you see a lot in music, because being in the position that he is, or a famous musician, I mean, there's no other human experience like it, where you're going to a stadium that you've sold out and you're, performing your art, and, thousands to millions of people are enjoying it. I mean,
Mhm.
it really is kind of a strange place to be as a human being. And it
Yeah.
comes with that weird kind of predatory people, where people want to use you as a product, make money off of you, and sell what you're making. So definitely, I think, a universal kind of theme in the music industry.
Yeah, I think the other thing is that the melody in this song is like very disorienting, and so as he's like trying to question like who's around him and like where he is, it's like very literal. Like, what city am I in? Like, who's around me? Who's trying to steal from my pocket? Like that sort of thing. So I think he's kind of like disoriented by what he's become, and it adds like a lot of weight to the end of the album, which I think sets it up very well for where we're going.
Awesome, man. Do you want to dive right into Jet Fuel then? I think that's a
Yeah, let's
perfect
do
kind
it.
of intro.
All right, so so Jet Fuel is definitely like kind of a mellow song, but there are some like chords in the backdrop that are a little bit sort of darker in nature, right? For me, I kind of read the song as like him kind of like beginning to like falter at the top, right? So the title of Jet Fuel, we might be able to assume that like now he's like above the clouds and he's cruising, but he kind of like questions like what everything what everything kind of like means at the top, right? Um, so he's like, oh, like my head's underwater, but I ain't in the shower and I ain't getting baptized.
Right.
So
Yeah.
like, yeah, his head is definitely underwater, right? So like, um, he might not have to swim, but his mind is still kind of like weighed down with the person that he is. And now like the only support he has is kind of like what he's made of himself. But obviously jet fuel kind of runs out, right? And so
Right.
he kind of like mentions at the top, like he'll just be around until he runs out of jet fuel and that he never will. But obviously we know that like that can't be the case. Like you need to refuel at some point. So if he just keeps running at this level, is he going to crash? I don't know. What's your opinion, dude?
Yeah, and I read an interesting kind of part on some of these interpretations that this album in particular for him was kind of an obsession, that he basically slept at the studio, didn't sleep, and wanted to work at this album. So to me, it could also kind of relate to the creative genius that it takes to make an album like this, or it could, the mindset to make an album like this. There's almost kind of a sense of mania to this song, where you're flying high, you're writing lyrics. It's like the creative juices, I'm sure he's using, the influence of drugs or alcohol too, which kind of taps into that sense of jet fuel, where it's flammable, it burns bright, it, gets you to where you need to be, but then you get that crash. And to me, the outro again really plays into that, where he's talking about falling in deep, head back to their ground. It's that, he's putting all this effort into this piece of art, and that's what's so cool about this album too, is a lot of this can be interpreted in different ways. Is this about the album? Is it about his lifestyle? Is it about his depression? I think that's why he was frustrated at the beginning when people say this is just a breakup album, because I think really the fact that you can interpret this in many ways does mean that he made something more, and that the creativity and the genius of this album really does shine through.
Yeah, 100%. So going back to the idea that Matt kind of like grew up in music, right? So I mean, he was like pretty young when he first released Kids, which is much more like frat rappy album. There's not like a lot of very good introspection on things like this. I'm sure obviously he still had a lot of these problems when he started, but it definitely got magnified throughout his life. And so, yeah, it's interesting that, we kind of like ask, is this about his life? Is it about the album? Is it just like a culmination of all of it? Yeah, I mean, it's a super interesting idea. There is some piece of this song that might make it sound like the entire motivation for him kind of coming out of this dark place is to like make this album, make music, do what makes him successful and what he loves. And hopefully that's going to like give him a sense of purpose. But we're getting towards the end of the album, right? We're getting kind of like towards the death of everything.
Right.
And so it's like, it does beg the question, like, okay, after this is over and all the jet fuel burns out, what is going to become of him?
Right. And especially if he has that obsession with this album, if he's working on this day and night to get it perfect, and that's what's keeping his mind off of the depression, it kind of shows you, I guess from a clinical perspective, if someone has this medium, this creative outlet in their life, how important it is to their mental health and their mental kind of sanity. So
Exactly.
Really good point. All right, man. Final stretch. Are we going on the last song? So it goes.
This is it. So it goes.
This is it. All right, start us off, man.
All right. So now that we've kind of like talked about it, I'm interested, before I kind of like dive into some of these quotes, what did you get out of the melody of this song?
Oh man, it's got a really interesting quality, because there's almost like kind of this sing-songy, I think, feel to it. A lot of the chorus has, these la-di-das in it, and it really does have a different kind of sound than the rest of the album. So it does kind of stand out in that distinct light. And I think it's because it is the final song. It's trying to draw attention to it in that sense. And I'm interested what you think that sense is. What is the final song, and what does it kind of, how does it kind of recap the album or end the album on what note?
Yeah. So for me, this melody kind of sounds like he might be like falling. It does kind of create like a sense of tension that he might be like moving downward. So I think like the important thing to like kind of get here is this is like the connection back to the beginning, right? So obviously to me, Matt kind of like writes and lyricizes things in circles. And so this is literally started from the ground, kind of ascended, was flying, but all things must land, right? And so this is like literally his like falling descent back into who he might have been in the past. I don't think there's a lot in the lyrics. There's some things that might point to like him relapsing and becoming who he was, because obviously he's questioned what it's worth to kind of like pick himself up. And I guess like the question is now kind of answered as to whether like anybody can kind of like stay up on top when something inherently kind of pulls him down. Because obviously there are some connections in his more ascentful songs to what has held him back in the past. So I guess some important lines here. Obviously the big one is that you can have the world in the palm of your hands and still might drop it. I think that's kind of very telling, right? So
yeah,
obviously he talks about kind of like understanding the world in small worlds, understanding himself. He obviously like at the end of Small Worlds kind of like alludes to the fact that like a lot of times like he can genuinely get it wrong, maybe not have as much self-awareness and kind of fall back down. And so I think this is like kind of that manifestation of like, okay, like I kind of made it this far. I'm much more self-aware than I was, but ultimately it just kind of like wasn't enough. And despite having everything that I do, it kind of resulted in this kind of letdown, this fall.
Yeah, and my favorite lyric is "My God, it go on and on, just like a circle. I go back where I'm from." And what is that a reference to? Is it a reference to, like you said, the cyclical nature of his album? Is it the same experiences that he keeps having with depression and suffering? Is it addiction, or is it a reference to death? Just going back to where you're from, kind of that being unborn, and death, kind of being very similar. So yeah, man, I think as an ending song, it really kind of creates this interesting vibe that it really does kind of tell the story of this album, and I think it's a great finishing song. It really is a good
It is,
ending, I think, to the album.
yeah, it's a super great finishing song. So a couple things that he like touches on like before the end of the song is obviously like returning where he's from. Obviously like people who are like there, he says like they just say I've been gone too long. So it's like gone too long from where? From the top or the bottom. The sense of falling to me kind of makes it sound like he's falling towards the bottom, and that like he'll just like kind of like become kind of what he was and kind of fall back like into his old vices. Obviously, like a circle, he'll go back to where he's from. Obviously, like you kind of like fall into that rut, and that's kind of like your level of complacency is kind of like I guess a comfort zone, right? So ultimately, I feel like it is him kind of like delving down back into his old life. But one thing that I think is worth mentioning, obviously, like kind of things like in this album, like kind of go in circles. Obviously, like this is the completion of one circle. And I obviously I can't take credit for this, but the album ends on what's I guess called an unresolved note. I like watched a YouTube video on this. I thought it was super interesting. So it ends on an unresolved note. So I guess in music theory, it's supposed to kind of like symbolize that there's like something more like waiting on the end of the song. In his posthumous album Circles, it opens with the resolution of that chord.
That's awesome.
It is awesome, dude. It's like a super cool like thing. I would never have been able to notice that, but the concept of the two albums, as described as family, was that it's supposed to be swimming in circles. So his next album kind of focuses on some more upbeat topics. It's not as like I feel like well connected as swimming, but the concept is definitely still there. Ultimately, are we all just kind of like swimming in circles, or when we go back to it, where we're from, where is that? Have we actually reached nirvana? Sort of what is everything kind of meant to be?
Right. Man, thank you, dude. This has been an awesome album. You picked a really good one. I think.
Oh, I picked a great one.
I didn't think we'd have like 2 hours of content to talk on this album. So thank you for picking it. Thank you for taking the time. Do you have any last remarks about the album or anything in general before I go into plugs real quick?
No, I think ultimately there's like a lot to unpack with this album. There's a lot of context to understand. There's more context in this album than I really feel or like more than any other album, right? So ultimately, like being able to like unpack it allows, I think, the listener to kind of understand like what everything kind of means in detail. And I think the more you listen to it and the more you kind of understand like the story behind it, like the better feel you get from it.
For sure. All right, guys, that concludes this episode of Otoconia. This was their first bonus episode. If you want to hear the music with the commentary, please go to Spotify. It'll be up in a couple days. If not, check us out on YouTube. Subscribe. Check out some of our other shows, such as the art blog, the video gaming playthroughs. And yeah, we're going to keep making content. I hope you guys enjoy. If you have any questions or want to contact us, the email is otoconiaradio@gmail.com. I don't have this vinyl in my collection, so if someone wants to send it, go for it. Connor, we already got one vinyl out of this show, so we're on.
Oh, that's awesome. Right, this would be a big pickup. So anybody who wants to send it, go ahead. Send two.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, man, for doing this. I know you're busy and your time is valuable, so I really appreciate this. And it's been great to see you and talk to you, man. It's been too long.
Oh yeah, 100%, bro. Thank you for having me on the podcast. It's definitely a thrill. I'm glad to hear your take on it, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. I hope everybody that listens to this podcast kind of like gets something out of it, like I did.
Thanks, man. It's been a great time.
All right, man. Peace.